The one and only link we have in our navigation bar is to our sample form, which until now we haven't done anything with, but that's going to be the focus of today. Now, the first thing to note is we're not actually going to use a form in our simple blog application. Now, if we were using a web framework like Node.js with Express or Ruby on Rails or Python with Django or any of the other many options that are out there, what you would do is when you want to create a new article, you would use the form. You'd fill in each one of these form fields, the title, the author name, the publish date, and then all the article content would go in here in this text area. This is a checkbox, and if it was ready to publish, you would check it. If it's still a draft, you would uncheck it. Or alternatively, you could use a radio button, whereas if it's a draft, you click on draft, and if it's published, you click published. And if we had categories, you would select the category in this drop-down select box, and then when it's all ready to go, you would hit submit. Then the web framework would receive the form submission. It would store it in the database. And we would have one article file here that would have a placeholder for each one of these fields, a title field, an author field, date field, and content field. Then when a user clicked on an article title, the web framework would go to the database, pull the article data from the database, fill in all those placeholders in the article template, then send the article file to the user's browser. But, like I said, we're not doing it that way, and we don't really need to do all that. Instead, we're going to have a separate article file for each article. So if we had 10 articles, there would be 10 files here. We'd probably use the name of the article as the file name. Then in the index page, where we have a summary and a link to the article, it would link to the appropriate article. However, web developers make forms all the time, so we have to address how to make a form. So let's take a look at the HTML. To create a form, you have to create a form element. And within that element, you put all your form fields and your submit button. Here, we're wrapping each form field in a div. And you don't have to wrap it in a div, but it helps keep them separate. Now notice we put a class on this div that gave a margin bottom -3, which is 1 rm or 16 pixels. But if you look over at our form, we don't have any margin here. Now, the reason for that is I wanted to show it without any styling at all. So I overrode that class by redefining it at the bottom and giving it a value of 0. Let's delete this and save it. Okay, now we've got some margin between our form fields. In each form field, there are two elements, a label and an input. Now the label has a for attribute with the value set to the ID of the input attribute. That's what links them together. And so what does that do? If the user wants to input data for the title element, they normally would have to click on the form field itself. But if you set the label with the for attribute, then they can just click on the label, and it'll also take them into the input element. The next form field is for author. It's also got a label and an input with the type of text. Now notice there's an attribute called value down here, and in the title field there's an attribute called placeholder. Both of them put visible text in the input element, and the difference is if it's a placeholder, then it's just something you view. It's not actual text in the form field itself. You might want to put some instructions as a placeholder, or you could put the label as the placeholder and leave this label out. If it's a value attribute, though, the value is in there as if the user typed it in. It's very useful for edit forms, where the form is going to be populated with the existing data, and then the user can make changes from there. The next form field is for the date last updated. It's also got an input attribute, but the type is set to date instead of text. And the browser will give you this date format here, and if you click on it, it'll give you this nice little date picker. Next form field is for our content. This is where we put our whole article. Notice it's a text area element, not an input element. And also notice that it's not an empty element. There's an opening and a closing tag. It's also got a rows attribute where you can put the number of rows to show. The default is 3. Now if the user types in too many rows, it'll create this scroll bar. They can also grab this and expand it. Okay, now let's take a look at the CSS. Okay, the first thing to note is all these input elements are displayed not as a block. They're displayed in line. A block element would add a line break before it and after it. So this input field would be below the label. So let's change the display to a block. Now each input element has a class called form control. So here we're going to set display to block, save it. And you can see now they're on a separate line. Now let's zero out the margin on the input, text area, and select elements. Save it. Now let's make these input elements take up the whole row. We'll do that by setting the width to 100%. There we go. And let's add some padding to it. So 0.375 RMs on top and bottom, which is about 6 pixels. And 0.75 RM on the right and left, about 12 pixels. Save it. Okay. Now some border around it with a radius. Save it. And let's make the font size, line height, and color in line with the rest of our text. Save it. Okay. Notice there's some helper text below this input element here. Let's change the style of that. Here's the div with the text. It's got a class called form text. Let's style that and save it. We shrunk the font size a little bit and gave it a gray color. Earlier, we resized the text area of this content form field. Let's go ahead and get that back to its normal state. Refresh the page. Okay, that looks better. At the bottom here, we have a checkbox for publish. So if you want to publish the article, you check it. If it's not ready yet, you leave it unchecked. Alternatively, we could use radio buttons, where you could submit it with the value of draft or with published. Let's go ahead and style this a little bit. All we're going to do is tweak the alignment and the margin. Save it. Now let's take a look at the HTML. Again, we have an input element. This time it's type checkbox. We also have a value attribute. Here it's set to true. So if the checkbox is checked and you submit the form, it will be submitted with the value of true. One thing about checkboxes is you can have multiple checkboxes for the same field. So if your field is categories and your article can have more than one category, let's say the user selects 2, well, when the form is submitted, both those values will be submitted for category. Now, if you only want the user to be able to select one value, then use a radio button. Again, we have an input element. This time the type is radio. And we also have a value attribute. This one is set to draft. This one is set to published. And when you submit the form, whichever one is selected, that value will be submitted for that form field. Also notice we have a name attribute. This is what ties the two radio buttons together. And that way, if one is checked and then you check the other, then the first one gets unselected. Now let's take a look at the category form field. Here we have a select box where the user can select one of a specific set of options. Let's take a look at the HTML for that. Now here we have a label element as usual, but instead of having an input element, we have a select element. And we're giving it a class, a form select, so we can style it. Now within the select element, we've got a number of option elements, and each one has a value attribute. And whichever one the user selects, when the form is submitted, that's the value that will get submitted for that form field. Also note that the first option doesn't have a value attribute. That's because it's more like an instruction to select a category. So if this one is selected when the form is submitted, then no value will be submitted. Also note this selected Boolean attribute. A Boolean attribute has a value of either true or false, but you don't actually set the value. If it's present, then it's true. If it's not present, then it's false. So because we have the selected attribute present, then this is the option that's going to be selected when the form is first presented. And then the user can go ahead and select a different choice. Now let's style this, make it look a little better. First thing to note is select is not a block element. It's an inline block element, so it doesn't take up the whole line. Let's go ahead and change that. Let's save this and refresh the page. And now it's on its own line. Now next thing we'll do is give it a width of 100%, so it'll take up this whole row. Save it. Okay. Now let's give it some padding. Looking better. Let's change that border, change the color, give it a radius around the corner, save it. Okay. And let's change the font size so it's the same size as the rest of our website text, 1 RM. Save it. Okay, looking a lot better. Now let's take a look at the buttons. Now this is the submit button. When the user is done filling out the form, they can click this and it'll submit the button to the server for processing. Next to it, we've got a link with the text of cancel that will take the user back to the home page. Now let's take a look at the HTML. We've got a button element and it's got an attribute called type with the value submit. If you have a button element with type submit within a form element, then when the user clicks it, it'll submit the form. Now the other type value we could use is button, and if it's a type button, then it won't do anything when you click it, unless you assign some JavaScript to it with an on-click event handler, which is a whole other topic we're not getting into now. And below that, we've got our anchor element that will link the user back to the root route, which defaults to index.html. And we've got some classes that will style the link to look like a button. Also, we're assigning some margin to the start. 4 translates to 1.5 RM, which is 24 pixels. That way we won't have this link crammed up next to the button. Okay, the default submit button styling is pretty ugly. Let's fix that. Now the first thing we're going to do is on the button element itself, we're going to set the margin to 0, and we're going to set the font family, font size, and line height all to inherit from the parent element. Let's save it and see what it looks like. Okay, every time we save it, it's going to take us back up to the top. So I added, for convenience, the submit button and the cancel link to the top. So let's do that again. Comment this out, save it. You can see the text is small. Let's undo it, save it. Now the text is the same as our normal text, and you may not notice, but the font family changed to match this. Now on our button and our link, there's a class called btn, and that sets up the basic structure from a CSS perspective of our button element. Now buttons by default have a display property set to inline block, but links have their display property set to inline. They're mostly the same, but inline block allows you to set the height and width of the element, whereas inline does not. Also, you can add margin to the top and bottom with inline block, but not with an inline element. So we're going to set the display property of this link to inline block. And we're also going to set the color to our blackish color, and we're going to get rid of the underline. Let's save it. Okay. Now let's add some padding to make the button a little bigger. Save it. Now this next thing, the pointer or the cursor. On a link, the cursor turns into this pointer, but on a button, there's no change. We want our button to also have a pointer when you hover over it. Let's save it. And now the link has a pointer, and so does the button. Now, let's set this background to be transparent instead of this light gray color, and we're also going to set this border to transparent. Okay. Now the reason we did that is because the next class is what sets the color. On our submit button, we've got a class of btn-primary. Primary for Bootstrap is blue. And our anchor element is going to set it to secondary, which is gray. Let's uncomment this. Save it. We set the color to white and the background and border color to blue. Now notice here, we've got a pseudo class that when the link is in the hover state, when the cursor is over it, it's going to change the background and border color to this darker blue. Let's see that in action. There we go. Now our cancel button has a class of btn-outline-secondary. Secondary is gray. This outline is going to give it a different look. Let's save it. So instead of coloring the background is left transparent and we just have the gray outline and the text is gray. Now if you look at the pseudo class on hover, we're going to change the background and border color to gray. Let's see what it looks like. There we go. Now the last thing we'll do is change the button size. For our cancel button, we've got a class called btn-sm, so button small. And for that class, we're resetting the padding, font size, and border radius to a smaller size. Save it. Okay, our button's a little smaller. Now, there's another class called btn-lg that will make it bigger. Okay, that covers it for buttons. Let's see what our form is going to look like if we connect it to the Bootstrap CDN. Let's get rid of these buttons. We don't need them anymore. Save it. And one thing I forgot is I meant to put margin at the bottom of each of these labels. And it's already coded. I just forgot to uncomment it. There we go. The label element's display property is set to inline by default. The issue is we want to add margin at the bottom. And you can't add margin to the top or bottom of an inline element. You have to convert it to an inline block first, or a block. So that's what we did here. And let's save it. Okay, now we have a little bit of margin there. Now let's comment out our mimic Bootstrap style sheet and link to the Bootstrap CDN. Now let's save it. Yep, looks identical. Okay, buttons. All right, let's take a look at the other pages. The home page. Looks fine. And the article page. Okay. All right, well, that ends this section, and our blog website coding is now complete. To use it in production, you just have to add your own name, your own logo, and for each article, you just copy the article template file, rename it to the article title, and obviously change the content. And then in the index page, you would link to the article file name. And that's it.